Can we start now? So. Please come here, sir. So welcome to all of you, and especially warm welcome to two speakers we have today, Amb.Rakesh, Sood, and Amb.Vishnu Prakash. So today, we propose to discuss recent developments in the Korean Peninsula and the implications for us. These developments have indeed been quite dramatic, in fact. If you look at where we stood a few months ago, even in November, December last year, we had the situation of President Trump very openly, in his usual Twitter storm, speculating about the military strike against North Korea. Trump and Kim Jong-un trading rather colorful insults, and Kim going ahead with his missile testing. I think last was in November 2017, which was 86th test since he took office in 2011. 4 nuclear tests and 86 missile tests during a period of 6 years plus. Now, if you move on to early January this year, and Kim Jong-un's New Year message, which was in 2 parts. One, he talked about how North Korea has the capability of hitting the entire mainland USA with its nuclear missiles, and that he has kept the nuclear button right on his office desk to access it anytime he likes, and Trump responding that he has a bigger nuclear button on his side. But simultaneously, he also talked about room for bring down tension, and specifically possibility of North Korea participating in Winter Olympics in South Korea the next month. The ROK reaction was very quick, which gives the impression that there was already back channel discussion going on between 2 Koreas. And then, as you know, we had the visit of DPRK delegation to South Korea to participate in Winter Olympics, and then ROK delegation led by National Security Advisor coming to Pyongyang. And we have setting up of 2 summits, one involving Kim Jong-un and ROK President Moon Jae-in, which will be on 27th April, and second one involving Kim and President Trump, for which dates have not yet been announced. And then one very important unofficial visit has taken place. That was a visit of Kim Jong-un to China in late March. This was his first overseas visit since he took office in 2011, and clearly a very important visit where both China and North Korea tried to set the stage for Kim's meeting with Trump in near future. China clearly has inserted itself as the central actor in developments relating to Korean Peninsula, and Kim has suddenly transformed himself into a statesman-like figure rather than someone who was being converted into a marginalized person. As you know, yesterday during a meeting between Trump and Japanese Prime Minister in USA, Mar-a-Lago, Trump announced that he's looking at his summit meeting with Kim Jong-un in early June or a little earlier. And you also mentioned that there have been very high-level contacts. Some speculation in American press that Mike Pompeo, current CIA director and Secretary of State designate, was in Pyongyang in late March for meeting with Kim Jong-un. So clearly, a whole lot of things are happening. And to talk about these developments, we have two very distinguished experts. Ambassador Rakesh Sood, as you know, Rakesh has been following these developments for about quarter of a century now, maybe even longer, in various capacities. As someone who set up, disarmament and international security affairs division of Ministry of External Affairs, headed it for 8 years. As our DCM in Washington, as our permanent representative to Conference of Disarmament in Geneva, and in other capacities. Rakesh has been following these developments. Likewise, Vishnu, once again, as you know, he was our ambassador in Seoul, High Commissioner in Canada, very high-profile spokesperson of Ministry of External Affairs. So both of them know what's happening in Korean Peninsula very intimately. What we will request them to do today is to look at the two upcoming summit meetings between Kim and Moon on 27th April and between Kim and Trump sometime possibly in early June, though date and venue have not been decided yet, and see what are the implications, what are the likely dynamics and outcomes of these two summits, and also look at some specific issues. For instance, is the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula really feasible? Is it something which is going to happen? If so, what kind of directions it will take? Approaches being adopted by the main players, especially two Koreas, USA, China, Japan, and Russia. Then what are the implications for us, for India? This is something I'll request them to explore, because what's happening in Korean Peninsula has a resonance well beyond the peninsula, because it's also part of the larger shift in geopolitical situation in Asia Pacific that's occurring today. And clearly, China and the USA both look at the emerging landscape in Korean Peninsula as a very important part of that ongoing transition. So now I'll first request Rakesh to make his opening remarks, speak about 15-20 minutes, followed by Vishnu, and then we'll have floor open for discussion. Rakesh.
Thank you, Ashok. I think for all the kind words, and it's wonderful to be here and see a lot of friendly faces. I think as you mentioned, the key difference today that you see, you talked of 4 nuclear tests that have been undertaken by Kim Jong-un. North Korea has undertaken a total of 6 so far. 2 were done by his father, and he has done 4. You talked of 86 missile tests between 2011 and now. Just to give you an idea, his father undertook 16 missile tests between 1994 and 2011. So that, in a sense, gives you the extent. It's the most marked shift, and best captured by this joke that Gemini told me today, which says the reporter asking the American president, well, why did you attack Iraq in the 1990s? So he says, because we suspected they had weapons of mass destruction. Oh, why did you attack Syria now? Because we suspect they have weapons of mass destruction. Why didn't you attack North Korea then? Idiot. Are you stupid? Because they really have weapons of mass destruction. So I think the key difference in that sense is that with this kind of testing, aggressive testing, the North Koreans have demonstrated a capability. So they have converted what was seen, and mind you, there have been various attempts at dialogue with North Korea since the end of the Cold War. It began in 1991 when the basic thaw took place and when the agreement on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula was concluded between the two Koreas. And there was also the basic agreement on setting out a friendship framework between the two countries. Thereafter, we had in 1994 the agreed framework, which was negotiated with the United States. That collapsed with the Bush administration. And then we had the six-party talks, which began. And those collapsed again in 2007. And so it's not as if we've not had dialogues even on the nuclear issue earlier between the US and North Korea. But as I said once again, the key difference in today's dialogue and today's summit will be that North Korea has to be treated and will demand to be treated as a nuclear weapon state. And that, I think, makes for the basic difference between earlier dialogues and today's dialogue. Now, Ashok talked about the different sort of statements and how they have shifted between last year when Trump came to power and he was talking about the possibility of war being a very real possibility. He was talking about Little Rocket Man. He was talking about, he ticked off Tillerson when Tillerson said that we are ready to engage in talks, about the shape of the table, about this, and Trump tweeted, "Save your breath, Rex, time for talks is over, now military options, locked and loaded," all that kind of stuff. North Korea in its turn called him a dotard, talked of man bereft of all reason, with whom no dialogue is possible and all of that. And now suddenly you see this prospect of a summit level diplomacy in end May or early June. What is probably the most difficult part of these talks is going to be two things. That when you start with summit level diplomacy, notwithstanding Pompeo's visit, the risks of something not working out and not having a fallback are very high. And in a sense, both the principal characters, Trump and Kim Jong-un, they enjoy being unpredictable. They consider that to be part of their sort of arsenal of diplomatic tools, as it were. And that unpredictability, if something does not go well, will lead to a situation where with people like Pompeo and Bolton as key advisors, and I think that is one of the key messages that probably Abe is carrying to the United States, because there is nobody more worried than, of course, the South Koreans and the Japanese, as well as the Chinese, and they would be conveying that message in their own way to Washington, about the rise in tensions were the summit to actually end in a collapse. And that is something which worries all three of them hugely. For knowing the declared positions of people like Bolton and Pompeo on this particular issue, it is quite clear that since they can't get the president to back off from the summit now, what they would probably think is that if the summit were to collapse, then they would be in a stronger position to recommend a strong military posture vis-a-vis North Korea and tighter sanctions. But notwithstanding that, there is also substantial differences in terms of the objectives with which, let's say, the key players, US, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, China, approach this business of the two summit level diplomatic engagements. For the US, the objective is very simple, and they've stated it. It has been stated by Trump as well. It is complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament. Now, the question that arises is that as far as North Korea is concerned, this is not going to happen in the beginning. Kim Jong-un has not followed this aggressive testing policies. He has not managed to work through the fairly harsh sanctions regime, which has been tightened, particularly in the last year, 2 years. He's not going to therefore give up and accept complete, verifiable, irreversible nuclear disarmament at the outset. As far as he is concerned, this is an end objective. And that is where the key difference lies in terms of the message that has been conveyed. He has mentioned that yes, denuclearization is possible, but then he has also linked it to phased steps, phased and synchronized. Now, what exactly does he mean by denuclearization? We know what the US means by denuclearization. But what does Kim Jong-un mean by denuclearization? What does Kim Jong-un mean by phased and synchronized steps that he expects others to take? And I think this is where some of the key things will be. However, for Kim Jong-un and even Tillerson, actually, before being removed, last year Tillerson had actually said, we are not interested in regime collapse. We are not seeking regime collapse. We are not seeking regime change. So in that sense, that security-related assurance about the North Korean regime, in a sense, has been conveyed by Tillerson. Obviously, that is a key objective as far as Kim Jong-un is concerned. But more than that, I think Kim Jong-un is also seeking, before getting the regime security assurance, he's also seeking a regime acceptance, which so far is something that has eluded North Korea. What do I mean by regime acceptance? A certain legitimacy. It's only in 1991 that North Korea and South Korea became members of the United Nations, because before that, each country's application would be vetoed by either the US or by China. It's only with the basic end of the Cold War that you had a situation where both countries became members of the UN. However, this was not followed up by recognition, in the sense North Korea doesn't have an embassy in South Korea, South Korea doesn't have an embassy in North Korea, the US does not recognize North Korea. The only country which moved forward was China. China, much to the unhappiness of the North Koreans, actually went and opened an embassy in South Korea and recognized South Korea. And today, China and South Korea have a huge trade relationship. I mean, something like $250 billion a year worth of trade. So, but the Chinese moved fast on it. The others didn't, they remained frozen. So I think by regime acceptance, what Kim Jong-un is talking about is some kind of movement somewhere along these lines. It may not be embassies, it may be something else, it may be offices, but there is something to that effect. What else does he want? He has indicated that there is a freeze in place in terms of testing. That freeze can continue, but at the same time, he's going to ask for sanctions relief, because the sanctions have hurt. There is no denying that. He would also like, presumably as part of regime acceptance, prefer that his human rights records and all of that, maybe he's able to do something with regard to separated families, but he would like some diminution of criticisms pertaining to North Korea's human rights records. Eventually, the denuclearization would imply questions about the US's security umbrella over South Korea, which also includes a nuclear umbrella. It would also imply questions about the presence of the 23,000 or 24,000 US soldiers in South Korea. And so there is, at most, therefore, the summit can actually be the beginning of a process, because there is no outcome. I mean, if it doesn't begin a process, then it actually is a failure as I see it. But it has to commence a process. If it can commence a process, then it will be successful. In the past, whenever, and mind you, there has never been a summit between a US and a North Korean leader, but there have been 2 summits between South Koreans and North Korean leaders. But none of these could result in a process, and that is why they collapsed. The nuclear negotiations also collapsed over a period of time. But what is today happening is that the nuclear negotiations are going to take place with a different, with the basic difference that I talked about, which is North Korea's situation as a nuclear weapon state. Coming back to the South Koreans, for the South Koreans also, the idea of regime collapse or anything like that, sorry, the idea of regime collapse is something which fills them with horror, because they sit just across the border. Lowered tensions, maintaining the alliance with the United States, and therefore a freeze in North Korea's testing program. Managing a complex diplomatic exercise in which they keep Chinese happy, they keep the Japanese on their side, they keep the US on their side, they ensure that the North Koreans remain engaged. I mean, that is essentially going to be President Moon's diplomatic challenge. And so far, he's played it very well, but he also has to understand that, in a sense, it is also Kim Jong-un's compulsions which have driven, and Kim Jong-un will be the star of the coming 2 summits. The Chinese have a complex relationship with North Korea. I mean, actually, the North Koreans probably for a long time, because the North Koreans were always closer to the Soviet Union. And there were tensions between, even at the time of Mao, and the North Korean regime. The North Koreans thought, with the unification of Vietnam particularly, that their time too was emerging closer vis-a-vis unification. But the Chinese certainly gave no indication that this was anywhere in their interests. In fact, the North Koreans were unpleasantly surprised when the Chinese decided to teach the Vietnamese a lesson in 1979, as they found that this was something which was unacceptable. And this had made, nowhere is this more evident, is this kind of mistrust more evident than in Kim Jong-un's behavior vis-a-vis China. The uncle who he purged, the half-brother who presumably he got killed, and all of that were very clear signals. And it's, yes, there is a certain dependence, and he did make the visit to Beijing, but he also made the visit to Beijing at the time of his own choosing, when he also needed to cover his back with the forthcoming summit, in terms of the forthcoming summit vis-a-vis Trump. For the Chinese, I think the Chinese understood the message, but they were quite happy to receive him and give him all the, although it was supposedly an unofficial visit, but it had all the trappings literally of a state visit in terms of the banquet and all the rest of it. The Chinese, it has given them center stage, as it were, in terms of the negotiations, and that is critical from the Chinese point of view in terms of their, as Ashok said, the larger geopolitical game that China is looking at, in terms of its role first in the region, Asia Pacific, and secondly globally. So that centrality is what they would like, and the Chinese were quick to capitalize on it by sort of, when they sent off Yang Jiechi to Seoul to brief the South Koreans about Kim's visit to Beijing. Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been in Tokyo and presumably would have also briefed the Japanese about what is happening. If you remember, Trump had tweeted on more than one occasion that he had spoken to Xi Jinping after Kim's visit, and so there has been a closing of the loop there. All of this pointing to the Chinese desire to maintain its centrality. For the Chinese to lower tensions are critically important, because if the tensions if the talks collapse, tensions rise, the South Koreans may come under pressure to employ yet another third battery, and that would make the Chinese uncomfortable. So to that extent, lowered tensions, diminished tensions is something which is both in China's interest and, as I mentioned earlier, Japan's interest and South Korean interests. However, in terms of denuclearization, the Chinese would not be too worried about it as long as the freeze is there. And which is why, if you remember, the Chinese offer of talks to the Americans was freeze for freeze. That you freeze your exercises and the North Koreans freeze their tests. The Americans were not willing to accept it. And if you notice one thing, that Kim, when he has talked of his freeze post his 1st January tweet, his 1st January message, he has not insisted on freeze for freeze. He has actually said, yes, we understand that you have to, this is what he told the South Korean National Security Advisor in early March. We understand your need for exercises, but we hope that you will take improved relationship and developments in our relationship into account in future, which means that exercises will continue. By doing so, he is actually also distancing himself from the Chinese position and showing that he can be an independent player and take his positions independently. So the Chinese were actually asking for more from the Americans than even Kim is asking for. And I think, therefore, this is an extremely interesting kind of a development. Ultimately, I don't think that unification of the Korean Peninsula is something, because even if you look at the European context, you find, just to give you an example, it is only in Ostpolitik times in 1972 that the two Germanys recognized each other. Till that time, they did not have a relationship with each other. It is only in 72 that they actually ended up opening offices in each other's countries. 1974, it was followed up by the US affording recognition to East Germany. And 1990, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the Berlin Wall fell, was when German unification took place. So, in that sense, unification or denuclearization is something which is going to be very much in the long term. In the short term, it is going to be two leaders who enjoy being unpredictable.
Thank you very much, Rakesh, for bringing out these nuances, and also what will be main objectives of major players to run up to, especially summit between Kim and Trump. So now I'll invite Vishnu to make his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Ashok, and thanks also for the gracious introduction. A very good afternoon, friends. I'm absolutely delighted to be here at this roundtable, which is, I think, a very timely initiative. I would like to thank and compliment ICS and Ambassador Ashokanta for organizing that. As you all know, the Korean Peninsula has been and is one of the most volatile flashpoints in the world. And to this flashpoint, or this cocktail, add weapons of mass destruction. The volatility becomes even more lethal. And as if that's not enough, as Ashok alluded to, the protagonists have been competing on the size of the nuclear button. So what you have is something which is live, dangerous, and volatile. Yet in recent weeks, there has been a ray of hope. There have literally been unprecedented developments. It reminds me of the weather in some parts of the world where people love to say, if you don't like the weather, wait for a little while. And in the case of Korean Peninsula, I think you can extend that to the Korean Peninsula. If you don't like the political climate, strategic climate, please wait for a few days, months or weeks. And it's literally like a roller coaster. And now you see 31st of December, there was one situation, and the 1st of Jan, there was a dramatic change. I mean, that's the kind of change that the theatre brings about. I'd been privileged to fly the Indian flag in South Korea for 3 years, from 2012 to 2015, and absolutely loved the place. It's a vibrant democracy, and I regard it as the greatest success story of the 20th century. I was often asked in South Korea about the similarity between India and South Korea. Leave aside the important aspects of democracy, etc. And I would always make two observations. One, that we both are located in a very difficult and dangerous neighborhood. And what surprised me was that I got incredulous looks. They thought that I didn't know what I was saying. Dangerous? What is the danger of South Korea? When I was in Seoul in 2013, for the nth time, South Koreans, Kim Jong-un, threatened to douse Seoul in the sea of fire. I mean, this kind of rhetoric that emanates from Seoul is blood-chilling, and yet the South Koreans didn't miss a step. The stock market firmed up. Despite North Korea's aggression, provocations, bellicose statements, what is almost surreal is the strong desire for reunification. Granted, it's more amongst the people in the category of 60 plus, more for amongst the official circles, but the desire to have a thaw in the relationship, the desire to have a reunification continues to be very strong. The other thing that I said was, I used to tell my Korean friends that there is in India or South Korea never a dull moment. And that's when heads nod, they smile. Yes, that's very true. Now consider this. On the 31st of December, the two sides were eyeball to eyeball confrontation. They were hurling invectives, as Ashok said, very colorful language at each other, threatening mutual destruction. North Korea shrugged off debilitating sanctions at a huge cost to advance its weapons of mass destruction. You heard what Ambassador Kanta mentioned, that they had conducted 86 missile tests, one better than the other. The sixth and the most powerful nuclear test, thermonuclear device, there is still a debate on whether or not it was thermonuclear, was in September 2017. And what the experts feared happened in November 2017, when the Hwasong 15 ICBM, which on a standard trajectory can do 13,000 kilometers and hit the US mainland, was tested. The Americans and the so-called experts have been caught napping again and again and again at the pace at which the weapons of mass destruction, the missile and the nuclear capability has been developed by North Korea. Now, as of 31st of December, the doomsday clock was ticking furiously, and the possibility of conflict was literally growing by the day, although 1 year ago one always discounted that, but on the 31st of December one thought that there is some possibility of a conflict with horrendous consequences. I would like to recall that at least 20,000 pieces of missiles, artillery, other heavy equipment can be rained on South Korea every minute by North Korea in case hostilities break out. And the human cost, the destruction, is unimaginable. And then 1st of Jan happened, and out of the blue there was this grand offer for a dialogue. There was also the offer to participate in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, and then things moved at a pace which nobody could have anticipated. There were talks, there was an agreement to march under the unification flag, there was a unified women ice hockey team, hotline was restored, and then nobody expected, or very few people expected, the sister of Kim Jong-un, 30-year-old Kim Yo-jong, came to South Korea. Within days, South Koreans were worshipping the ground on which she was walking, all of 30 years. They were charmed by her poise, by her smile, her gait, her humility. Anyway, they found her very humble. And she literally hijacked the Winter Olympics. And she was, by the way, the first person from the Kim regime, Kim dynasty, not regime, Kim dynasty, to set foot on the Korean soil. And she did not utter a word in the public. All they did, she was smile. And she extended a personal invitation from Kim Jong-un to President Moon. And frankly, no South Korean leader can turn down an invitation of having a summit with North Korea. And least of all Kim Jong-un, whose parents were from North Korea, and is known to be a votary of peace and dialogue. I would like to recall and in fact quote Kim Jong-un on the Moon Jae-in on the 9th May 2017, soon after being elected. He said, 2017, almost a year ago, under the right conditions, I will also go to Pyongyang for peace on the Korean Peninsula. I will do everything that I can do. So that was Moon. And then, as we have heard, the Korean NSA and the KCIA chief land in Pyongyang. They have an unprecedented 3-hour dinner meeting with Kim Jong-un. And now on the 27th, there will be a first ever summit in the Peace Village on the DMZ. And technically, a North Korean leader, supreme leader, would set foot on the South Korean soil. And hectic preparations are underway. I mean, South Koreans would want the event to be beamed live. They want a press conference. I mean, whatever happens will be unprecedented, that's for sure. Then Korean NSA flies to Washington, meets with Trump, and Mr. Trump startles the world by unconditionally agreeing to meet Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un also offers to denuclearize if, and this is very important, if the regime's security is guaranteed. We'll come back to that. It now transpires that it was not just this. At one point, everybody thought that what is it? North Korea is quiet, Kim Jong, and everybody is taking just the South Korean NSA at his word. And how can they, whether he's carrying the right message or not carrying the right message? But now it's quite clear that back channels between North Korea and USA were in operation. And they were talking at New York, they were talking at perhaps Beijing, they were talking at other places. And now we know that the latest is that perhaps Mike Pompeo met with Kim Jong-un on the 1st of April in Pyongyang. And then was as surprising was the visit of Kim Jong-un to Beijing. You could see him shaking hands, a beaming Kim Jong-un shaking hands with Xi Jinping. Doesn't matter who invited whom, but the point was that he was there. And overnight, the frosty glares turned into warm smiles. I mean, there's something really surreal about that. It sounds like fantasy and or a dream. I mean, you could call it a good dream or bad dream. It feels too good to be true. And frankly, I cannot shake off the sense of déjà vu. I mean, one has been there, one has seen that. The script does not change, the characters change, the language changes, but things continue as usual. Now, let us quickly see what led to the dramatic U-turn on part of Kim Jong-un. Well, North Korea in 2017, as it came to a close, had almost become an international pariah. There were ever-tightening sanctions, more than 10 rounds of that, which were biting. It had almost dried up the export revenues of Kim Jong-un or North Korea, and it's believed that the Chinese exports, and China has 90% of trade with North Korea, the Chinese exports to North Korea fell by about 1/3 in 2017, and the drop is even sharper or said to be sharper in 2018. The international opinion was coalescing against Kim Jong-un's adventurism and threats, and its sole benefactor, although grudging benefactor, a frustrated benefactor, China, was doing what it knows to do best, supporting sanctions in New York and trying to find loopholes to circumvent them on ground. nations had begun to downsize relations, and these or some had withdrawn ambassadors, including Kuwait, Mexico, Malaysia, Peru, Philippines, Spain, Thailand, and we must give some credit to Mr. Trump. His saber rattling had actually was showing some confusion. I mean, we wonder whether Kim Jong-un had met his match in Mr. Trump. And the worst part was that from North Korean perspective, South Korea, USA, and Japan were singing from the same music sheet. So it was a difficult situation for young Kim Jong-un, and showing amazing flexibility, a wisdom or craftiness beyond his years. He then decided to shift gears dramatically. He decided to fall back on the ploy, favorite ploy in the playbook, to dangle the olive branch of denuclearization. Big objective was to try and wean away the Republic of Korea or South Korea, because South Korea, for very understandable reasons, just does not want conflict, period. Whether they're a conservative government or liberal government, as I did mention, the results of a conflict are unimaginable. He wanted to buy time, he wanted to pitch for humanitarian assistance, he wanted to get the sanctions diluted, and he also felt that he was now in a position, dealing from a position of strength, because he had acquired an ICBM, he had acquired a thermonuclear device. Granted that there are questions about the re-entry capability of the ICBM, granted there are questions about the miniaturized warheads that can be coupled with the missiles, there are question marks. But point really is, which is generally recognized, that the pace at which this very complicated technology was mastered by Kim Jong-un's government was amazing. And then he wanted to make up with China and Russia to strengthen his position. There is some speculation that Kim Jong-un may be traveling to Moscow soon. So let's move towards now the next steps. What I see likely, the imponderables and assessment. I think I would give credit to President Moon. I did mention he did engage in regular peace overtures, both from Seoul and outside during his travel. Very reluctantly, one will give some credit to my good friend President Trump for arm twisting Kim Jong-un. But round one, or this round, goes without any doubt to Kim Jong-un. His brilliant diplomacy, almost hats off for his brilliant diplomacy. He had no cards except WMD, and to change the narrative within days and weeks is unprecedented. He has shown amazing flexibility. He has managed to crack the anti-North Korea front. And as the Americans like to say, and they deny, that he has sown daylight between Republic of Korea and the US. To Japan, he has managed to sideline Japan. Japan has very little say in the matter, and they are scrambling to somehow either be on the negotiating table or at least have their challenges and their concerns, which is the biggest concern is the abducted women's issue, which is a very emotional aspect for the Japanese, and they want that to be highlighted. I would dare predict that the summit between Republic of Korea and Kim Jong-un would be a successful summit, because the stakes are very high. Kim Jong-un knows that the big prize, that is the summit with Trump, will only happen if there is a successful outcome or seemingly successful outcome with Kim Jong-un. I think they will make the right noises. North Korea will pitch for humanitarian assistance. There could be some kind of early harvest package if that is approved by USA. They'll be stepping up of people-to-people exchanges, sports, culture, and especially the divided families. There'll be a series of talks which will be lined up. And since the sides are technically still at war, and there are more and more indications that there will be a possibility of discussion, at least there will be a discussion on a peace treaty. And I don't think Kim Jong-un agreeing to everything, because he would want to make the biggest concessions to Trump, but now the peace treaty and normalization of relationship is being branded about. At least there will be no further tightening of sanctions from Kim Jong-un's perspective in the short term. And then the other big outcome has been that China is back in the game. For a few weeks, the South Korean diplomats or South Korea was in the limelight. Their diplomats were shuttling the globe to brief, and there was this unprecedented scenario where the South Korean NSA was briefing on the lawns of the White House. It has never happened. And China was getting uncomfortable. It is very high stakes, and it wants to maintain its primacy of ties with the North Korea and the region. China does not want to see, of course, the Western powers trawling along the Yalu River or the Tumen River, where they have a 1400 kilometer maritime boundary. And as I mentioned, President Xi quickly invited Kim Jong-un, or maybe the invitation was sought, full state honors accorded, and China effectively signaled that it's back in the game, and also pitched effectively for being on the high table. Kim Jong-un very rightly or dutifully, I would say, said that he'll be open to the six-party talks, and we all know that the six-party talks was hosting, which was never-ending, which was open-ended, was hosted in Beijing and chaired by China. Now, Kim Jong-un stated in Beijing, as per Xinhua, and I quote, "The issue of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula can be resolved if South Korea and the United States respond to our efforts with goodwill, and then the most important bits, create an atmosphere of peace and stability while taking progressive and synchronous measures for the realization of peace." Now, peace and stability, create an atmosphere of peace and stability, which can be now defined by any side in any way they want. Progressive measures, simultaneous measures, there will be a debate, unending debate. Granted, this is a maximalist position that both sides are staking, but point is that there are so many imponderables which have been left in the air. Now, I came across an interesting quote by Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un, on the 23rd of January 2009, which was reported again by Xinhua, where he said, "The North Korean side will commit itself to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and hopes to coexist peacefully with other involved parties." So as I said, only the actors have changed, the script has not. And Kim Jong-un very expectedly introduced caveats, which will be very difficult for Trump and our Republic of Korea to accept, because they want, as was mentioned by the other speaker, to front load obligations on Kim Jong-un's part. And they want the WMD program to be dismantled before they ease sanctions, which will not happen. So the stage is set for a very bruising and long negotiations. So let us look at the denuclearization challenge, which goes to the heart of the issue. Both sides have different scripts and expectations. So USA and ROK want, for them denuclearization means only denuclearization of North Korea, not of the Korean Peninsula. The South Korean side wants to maintain the US troops. The South Korean side wants to continue with joint military exercises. They want to keep being under the security umbrella. Now, question is that if North Korea denuclearizes, suppose, which will not happen, but suppose it denuclearizes, where is the threat coming from? But that nobody wants to talk about, because everybody is painting North Korea as a villain, which is not the case. North Korea obviously wants the US troops out, and feels threatened by the maritime and air-based assets of USA. It sees the weapons of mass destruction, its own weapon of mass destruction, as an insurance, as a key to regime survival. and believes rightly, in my view, that it's a question of its it's an existential crisis, and it knows that the only thing which is saving it is the weapons of mass destruction. North Korea's conventional weapon superiority has been erased, and I think it is stating the obvious that both sides will find it very difficult to reconcile the pace and sequence of denuclearization. Then there is a big issue of the annual joint military exercises between USA and Republic of Korea. The big question that nobody wants to talk about is it needed at all? If North Korea is not a threat, why do you need military exercises? But I don't think that, at least as of now, USA and Republic of Korea, according to the stated positions, are willing to make a concession. They also want the security umbrella, and obviously North Korea wants it to be halted, which is difficult, and they can very easily assert that this vitiates the peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula. Then the big issue, or even a bigger issue, is security guarantees. Frankly, North Korea does not trust anybody, least of all USA, and even especially Mr. Trump. They know that they are astute observers of world affairs. They have seen the fate of Saddam Hussein, they have seen the fate of Gaddafi, they have learned the lessons from the demise of USSR, and they have seen how Trump is playing around with the Iran deal. And every time Trump threatens to resign the Iran deal, North Korea is even more certain that USA is very transactional, that USA assurances cannot be taken on face value. And then there are people like Mr. Bolton and Mr. Pompeo who have now the ear of President Trump, and that worries North Korea because they are committed to regime change. So only thing that North Korea trusts is itself and its weapons of mass destruction, and it will be absolutely suicidal in my view, regardless of what assurances are given, whatever goodies are branded about, for North Korea to give up the only leverage that they have for survival, which is weapons of mass destruction. So the quid pro quo that North Korea will seek will be regime recognition, lifting of sanctions, massive economic assistance. Then there's a question of venue of the summit. As of now, it seems that it will either happen in Beijing, more likely in Beijing, or at the Peace Village along the DMZ. But the question of, because North Korean leader is very scared of his safety, and I don't think that he would be open to traveling to any Western country or far away from his comfort zone. Now let us sum up. But before I sum up, let me briefly touch upon the Indian aspect. There are many people out of emotion, in my view, more out of emotion than reality or practicality, talk of India inserting itself in the equation. That India has a role in the Korean Peninsula. I would most respectfully say that India has no role in the Korean Peninsula. Diplomats do not like to be categorical, but I love sticking my neck out and love to get it chopped from time to time. Why do I say that? Because we have no leverage. We have neither a carrot nor a stick. And the only two countries, friends, let's face it, Russia does not have much of a leverage, Japan does not have much of a leverage. Japan will come in to provide economic assistance, because when there's a question, if it happens and if economic assistance has to provide it, all countries will start looking over their shoulders. And Japan, I think, will be brought in. The only two countries which have leverage in that order are China and USA. And if we know what is good for us, we should stay well away from the discussions or the issue. I mean, certainly we let our views known when there's a summit with Trump. We let our views known when there was a summit with Japan. We let our views known, And I would also say that India is the only country, nobody wants reunification. Actually, China does not, USA does not, USSR does not, and perhaps in some ways, Republic of Korea is absolutely intimidated by the price of reunification. I mean, this is not the forum to discuss the pros and cons between German reunification and the Korean reunification, but some of the price that has been branded about is as much as $2 trillion for reunification, for the simple reason that North Korean economy or GDP per capita is, South Korean per capita is 20 times that of North Korea. So, now to sum up, I would compliment North Korea as being very accomplished poker players. Kim Jong-un has shown that he's crafty and astute beyond his years. If you look at the Korean history, North Korean history of brinkmanship, it's amazing how they have engaged in aggressive brinkmanship, and at the last minute they have pulled back. How do they do that is beyond me. As I mentioned, that so long as Kim Jong-un or Kim clan is in power, they will not roll back or give up their weapons of mass destruction. And conflict, I would think, is not an option. Whether the summit fails with Trump or does not fail, the cost of conflict is unimaginable. But there is a danger, and that is of miscalculation or miscommunication. And that could escalate hostilities, and then the law of unintended consequences set in. Surgical strikes again are not an option because they have learned their lessons, and the weapons are deeply, or the assets are deeply embedded and dispersed because they know that they need the second strike capability. And contrary to propaganda, North Korea is not suicidal. It is the West propaganda which paints North Korea as the devil. I'm sure they have behaved in a way which many people or countries did not expect or do not want them to, but it's a question of their survival. So let's face it, last words, few words. Now North Korea is a de facto nuclear power. And only there is one realistic scenario which I've been saying for the last 1 year, and that is a negotiated freeze and moratorium on further tests in return for massive economic assistance. In that scenario, the assets will come under the UN or will be safeguarded, will be monitored by UN or IAEA. It will not roll back the program, it will only delay the inevitable. The only thing we can do, the world community can do to delay the inevitable, as they try to do with Iran. But what do I expect from the summit with Trump? I think there will be token moves to appease the US. There will be promises will be made, timelines will be established, which are unlikely to be adhered to, not just by North Korea, but even South Korea and USA, and that has happened at least twice. Kim Jong-un will try to string along the US side at least till the next elections of presidential elections of Trump, or the danger could be over even earlier if there is a personal crisis or a national crisis that confronts President Trump. Basically, pressure may abate earlier on Kim Jong-un, but that is what he's playing for. And I will be the happiest person if I'm proven wrong. I think one is being realistic because the expectations from the American side, the South Korean side are completely unrealistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vishnu, for sharing your insights with us and for stating your views clearly and categorically, without entering caveat. I appreciate that. Now the floor is open for discussion. I'll request if you could introduce yourself and then.
My name is Ram Subramaniam. I'm happily retired. I want to ask you, Rakesh, it's very interesting what you said. I want, given your enormous experience in this area, is North Korea still part of the NPT or out of the NPT?
Well, I mean, according to me, North Korea is not a party to the NPT because they chose a legal they chose the legal route to withdraw from the NPT, and they withdrew formally from the NPT. And so in that sense, they are not a party to the NPT. However, the NPT is loath to admit that the withdrawal option has been successfully legally exercised. And so if you go to the UN website and you look at the list of NPT states parties, it will still say North Korea with a little asterisk and a footnote saying North Korea gave notice of withdrawal, etc., etc., etc. But the fact is that technically they have, not just technically, legally they have withdrawn. And so I think that in terms of international law, they fulfilled the requirements, they explained the circumstances, they informed the 3 depository states and the UN Secretary General, and therefore their withdrawal remains final.
Can I develop the next question? Because of that, I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
would this entail in the case of Japan, supposing they gave 6 months notice, since you and the Ambassador Prakash also said that it is an established fact that it's a missile and nuclear power, you know the saying that Korea is a dagger at Japan's heart, especially after unification. Do you see the Japanese, in your view, giving 6 months notice like North Korea and withdraw from the NPT and become nuclear? As you know, its capacity to become nuclear is quite easy. I'd like your reaction to that.
Well, first of all, the North Koreans gave almost 10 years of notice and not 3 months. I mean, they first indicated their decision, notice to withdraw in 1993. In 1994, they put it in abeyance. They didn't withdraw it. They merely said, our notice for withdrawal has been put in abeyance. After the whole axis of evil business and when Bush formally abrogated the agreed framework agreement that had been concluded in 1994, that's when the North Koreans said, okay, now we are exercising that abeyance thing has been lifted. So there was a 10-year, almost a 10-year notice period during that period, and between their warning and their actual thing. Now, insofar as Japan is concerned, yes, but this is one of the reasons why the NPT community does not want to accept a legally successful withdrawal, because what does it imply for the others? It means that yes, you can withdraw. And that is something which the NPT community wants to tiptoe around and not formally accept. Now, so under the this is why, insofar as Iran is concerned, Iran has never indicated any desire to withdraw from the NPT. So the key difference here is that, therefore, that's why I said North Korea is a nuclear weapon state, and legitimately so, because even its first test was carried out after it had withdrawn and thrown out the IAEA inspectors from its territory.
Just to add,
Just to add a comment that
I
I
wanted
want to ask him something.
No, sure, you can ask me, but I wanted to respond to you. Go ahead first, sir.
Is it?
Can you use a mic?
Not my understanding.
Can you use a mic, please?
Sorry, it's not my understanding that North Korea has nuclear weapons. I mean, has ICBM capability or thermonuclear. I prove me wrong. My understanding, Rakesh would know better. To have a trigger for thermonuclear weapons, you need enriched uranium. Unless China has given the hydrogen bomb in toto without testing to North Korea. Number 2, no-tong missile and Taipo-tong is the maximum range they achieve. 13,000 kilometers doesn't seem credible to me, sir. I'd like your comments.
No, fair enough. I rest my case. This is, as I said, that there is no final word. These are assessments. Nobody has visited the site to measure and say that, but that's the international opinion of experts. There are contrarian opinions. So I mean, I give it to your wisdom. I mean, if that's what you feel, that may be the case. As far as I am concerned, to answer just one bit on the Japan issue, yes, sir. Technically, Japan can withdraw from NPT because there is a clause for withdrawal. But will it happen? Very unlikely. 2 reasons. One, there's a very strong peace constituency in Japan. And two, Japan is under the US security umbrella and USA will never allow that. Thank you.
So I have a question for both the ambassadors. President Jimmy Carter, once visited North Korea, I think in the early 90s. And, but if you see into the Middle East, the country Libya, Iraq, and now it is happening with Syria, they came up with certain issues attacking because biological weapon, this, that and all. Then later they deframed the dictator by virtue of abusing human rights abuse and many other things. So here, so much of human rights abuse. If at all, suppose I commit a crime, if there are provisions that my next generation also lives in the concentration camp. So why, I'm not talking about today's day. Today they have a nuclear weapon, hydrogen bomb and all these things. But why not on those period, after the fall of USSR, those time the US did not attack them, and what was the problem with them that it was not attacked that point of time? Today it became a big issue in the world now. So I look forward for your comment.
Very good question. With hindsight, the vision is 2020. I mean, if you're looking at 1991 or 94, perhaps you would take different steps. But at that time, in the wisdom of the leadership, they thought that they could manage to peacefully disarm North Korea. North Korea in 91 or 94 was not a nuclear power, but they started developing missiles. So they thought that the packages would work. And there were chances of its working at that time. The threat perceptions were different. And when we look at why 91, 94 agreements fell apart, there have been reasons. It's not just North Korea's fault. Practically every side to it did not go with bona fide intentions. And almost no side met its part of the bargain.
Just, to be able to address concerns. This is a common failing. If you don't understand what the other person's real concerns are, then chances are that your negotiation, you will end up with a deal which is, you don't have the right kind of buy-in into it. For, as I said, the North Koreans have a wider range of concerns vis-a-vis the US presence, vis-a-vis the US security umbrella with South Korea, etc., etc. For the Americans, the critical issue is non-proliferation. And so it is the nuclear program. And now, okay, so the North Koreans see it, they see, all right, if we don't deal with this, then we can't tempt them into the negotiation. And so you start a negotiation. Right? You take a classic case with Iran, for example, which is a parallel thing. When the talks originally began sometime when it was the E3, the Europeans were negotiating with Iran, and at that time the Iranians had indicated that the Americans needed to be brought in. The Iranians were keen that they discuss all aspects of the relationship. Not just the nuclear issue, but this whole regional business and all of that. The Europeans and the Americans said, no way, we don't want to discuss this. It is focused exclusively on nuclear. The talks didn't go very far. Ahmadinejad, the thing collapsed after a period in time when the talks resumed between Obama, Rouhani, when there were a whole range of talks that took place in Oman. This is the time that the Americans said, let's broad base the dialogue. By this time, Iraq had happened, the Iranian influence there, Hezbollah, all of that. The Iranians said, no, nuclear only. And now you see the implication of that when Trump is threatening additional sanctions. He is not, nobody is accusing Iran of actually violating the JCPOA. At the meeting in Vienna just now of the Joint Commission, the 10th report by the IAEA was submitted indicating full, complete compliance with the JCPOA obligations as certified by the IAEA. What is Trump talking about? He's talking about regional behavior, destabilizing. He's talking about missile tests and stuff like that. Now, so clearly what is happening here is that there are two different issues that are rubbing up against each other, and that risk in the Korean case is also there.
Thank you. I am Sanjeev Srivastava. I am a researcher on foreign policy issues. My question is to Ambassador Prakash. I have two questions, sir. The first one is about latest. I think today I was going through some media reports that President Xi Jinping might be visiting Pyongyang very in near future, and another report, as you mentioned, that Kim Jong-un might be planning to visit Russia. So in that regard, what do you think the revival of a six-party talks after the summit? Are there any chances of such revival of those talks? This is my first question. And the second question is about your comment on India's role, and as you said that India has no role. I have a different view. Probably, I think that India has a role. I'm not talking emotionally, because I think that we had a very special summit of parliament. I mean, our parliament discussed the Korean issue during 1950s. And also, I think at a time when we seek a permanent seat in the UN Security Council on that high office, and also we have come out with our own Act East policy, coming out from the simply looking East policy. So in that regard, do you see that if the situation deteriorates in any time in future, India can play some kind of role in mediating, because we have embassy of North Korea here also and South Korea both. So that way. Thank you.
Well, India first. I respect your views, but stand by mine. And the challenge is that when NAM is spoken of, India's role in 1950 is spoken of, that was a different era. In this world today, you will have to have either carrot or stick, or both, preferably both, to be able to play a role. Now, please tell me, what carrot or stick does India have? As if we have hardly anything, and if you compare it with China or USA, we do not have anything. So, I would, if somebody were to ask me, I would counsel that we stay away, but I respect your views. On the six-party talks, that is something that North Korea would like. That is something that China will like. That's something that Russia will like. Because it's open-ended. And, that can go on and on and on. And that is something which North Korea will be very happy about. But question is, will the USA be happy about? Because USA, under Trump in particular, wants results now and immediately, and wants everything to be done by North Korea. Because it's almost unusual when I hear my South Korean friends talking about the fact that they say, oh, the security umbrella is very important for us. Or the US military presence is very important for us. No, we cannot give that away. The question is challenges from North Korea. With that kind of expectations and the kind of sanctions that have been imposed, so North Korea will be very happy to have six-party talks and say, all right, let's have a timeline. Let us say, this is what we will do, this is what you will do. But I don't think that USA is very keen to have six-party talks. Now that USA is engaging with North Korea at the highest level, I think some kind of an arrangement or an outline of the agenda may be constituted during the inter-Korean talks. And that will then, a variant of that or something like that would be then discussed during the Trump-Kim Jong-un summit. So that's what I feel. Thank you.
So I am Maiden Chakravarti. I fully agree with Amb.Vishnu Prakash. Kim Jong-un is definitely the hero of the moment. And this I'm giving you out of a direct military assessment. He stands well above, despite whatever you may say. Whether you take conventional, whether you take nuclear, whether you take his diplomacy, I think he's way above. Now, my point of view is only one, so it regards with Pakistan. So Pakistan has received missiles from North Korea. Today, I'm afraid that people may say the Mr. Ram Subramaniam said that they don't have the hydrogen bomb. India did its last test in 1998. I've been very, very deeply involved in missiles. I understand all these things. And being an artillery man, sir, I'm a firm believer unless you test all these cold computers and all, they don't work. A simple example, I went to a Punjab National Bank account and they wanted 10,000 rupees. I could not get it. None of their lines are working for the last 60 hours. This is a public sector bank. And I have been involved with technology. I got the Bofors gun into India. So if you look at it, Pakistan, if they get the fusion technology, you have been there. What do we do to stop this? This is my first question. Second question is this THAAD missile. There's so much of talk. ABM systems really are irrelevant today because of the MARV and the MERV capabilities. You have today so many, even India has the capability of launching 100 satellites. All these ABMs are purely, that's why I think a very wise decision has been taken. Even if you put 6 batteries in Seoul, what are they going to do? Unless you locate. So believe me, when my one artillery round is fired, you cannot locate it. We have moved our entire divisions on the Palm axis and Americans have not known. We have carried out nuclear explosions in what you call Pokhran and they didn't know. You can keep deploying 15 batteries in South Korea. It makes no difference to anybody. I want your exactly reactions on this.
On the later part of the question, I'll refer to my colleague who has Ambassador Sood, who is an expert on disarmament. So that I will request him to respond. On the unholy alliance or collaboration between Pakistan and North Korea, that is very well known. In fact, there was a very interesting book by Sham Bhatia, Goodbye Shehzadi, where he mentions that, and she had given him an interview and asked him not to publish anything while she is alive. And there she mentions herself, Benazir Bhutto, that in 1993 when she went for a summit meeting to North Korea, she carried over a large overcoat in which she had blueprints of enrichment, nuclear enrichment. So and then she used that same large coat to carry back missile blueprints. So certainly, but anything is possible. But my feeling is these were different days. The world was in denial, and Pakistan and North Korea could get away with that. Now, North Korea and Pakistan are both under the scanner, under the spotlight. And while clandestine, you are a military expert, anything is possible. But I would argue that it's unlikely that something like this happens now.
Well, I think the Chinese concern about THAAD is justified. So, I mean, you can choose to dismiss it and you can say, but I can tell you that if 5 more THAAD batteries were to appear in South Korea, the Chinese would just go ballistic. And I don't think they are putting it off. There are specific reasons. There are ways to reconcile some of the Chinese interests in terms of limiting the performance of the radar that accompanies the THAAD batteries, directional locking systems, etc., etc. The Chinese are not bothered about if the THAAD batteries are there to indicate, to address an incoming missile from North Korea, it is one thing. But they are more concerned about the fact as to what it does in terms of tracking their launches at an early stage to distinguish between real and decoy warheads and so on and so on. Which is why they have these concerns. I don't agree with you that if you say that, oh, they can have 6 batteries and it doesn't make a damn difference. I mean, I think that it does make a difference to the Chinese.
Sir, I'm Sanjeev Chopra. Just very basic question first and then 2 related issues with that. One is that as we were discussing and we were saying that nobody really wants the unification of Korean Peninsula and the cost is also quite high, $2 trillion, etc. And then, who is the one who really wants it? That what is the strategic compulsion? And when we say that President Moon took initiatives and then those initiatives are fructified and the things are moving ahead. And also in the same breath, we are analyzing that the expectations from this kind of a inter-Korean summit should not be very high, because things may not result in a win-win kind of a situation for both the parties. In such kind of a scenario, who's the one who is really forcing for it, and why so? Then, if I get the answer to that, so then I'll be able to raise two related issues to that. Sir.
Well, unification, you see, first of all, please understand what you have is a 1953 armistice. That can't be a permanent state of affairs. This has already continued from 53 onwards. So obviously it has to lead to something. A peace treaty, the borders are more or less settled along the 38th parallel. That means that two sovereign Koreas. Once that happens, then you can visualize a situation. Will they trade with each other? Do the economies start working together? And all of this is purely in the realm of hypothesis today, because nobody really knows where the situation is. And so it is difficult to talk of unification, but meanwhile, of course, it remains a stated noble objective, as Vishnu said. A lot of people in South Korea, particularly those above 60, seem to hanker after it. But the youth maybe less so. So, but yes, it's a good thing. But the Americans would like unification if they think that the regime can be co-opted into the South Korean model. The US presence can remain there. It becomes a larger South Korea, as it were, with a US treaty right on the doorstep of China. But obviously that's not going to happen. That's again wishful thinking. The Japanese certainly don't want a unified Korea. It becomes a huge country. The Chinese also won't want a unified Korea, because they would, what shape would that unified Korea take? Would it be based on the South Korean model with its close alliance to the West? Or you don't expect South Korea to get changed into the North Korean model, surely. I don't think that is, nobody can even think of that possibility. No, so therefore, the shape of what a unified Korea might look like is too far into the future and requires many other changes. That's why I reminded that even after we accepted two Germanys, the world accepted two Germanys as, it took such a long time, and it took major tectonic shifts, like the collapse of the Soviet Union before the German unification became a possibility. So the steps towards regime acceptance before leading to anything else are crucial, and that's where the challenges will lie. The unification it's fine. We can talk about it as an eventual goal, but I don't think anybody's going to seriously be looking at, other than probably a preambular paragraph or some such thing in some joint statement or declaration or something like that. So, just as denuclearization will also be somewhere further down the line.
Just to comment the case,
sorry. Just two comments. One look at the North Korean regime. It is rightly called the hermit kingdom. There's a bubble in which the people live. And the biggest threat to the North Korean regime today is not the USA is in a different refrain. It is a USB port. Just the humble USB port, which is smuggled in large numbers through the North China border, which has got real soaps, opera, soaps, movies, etc., about South Korea. Because the regime portrays South Korea in a different way, and those USB ports are duplicated, even knowing fully well that if somebody is caught, he's in the concentration camp. So point I'm trying to make is that the North Korean leadership quakes in its boots about opening up, about letting people know the reality. And that is what lesson they have learned from the demise of USSR. And USSR and North Korea, there was no comparison. I mean, USSR, people knew about USSR. And yet, when Gorbachev started the process of change, the change process took over. You can open a door, but you cannot open the door this much when there are winds forcing a change. Then the door is flung open. So that is challenge one for North Korea. They are very scared. The Kim clan is very scared. Two, if at all a reunification process happens, and as Rakesh mentioned, it will be a long drawn out thing, and it will be in phases. The first step would be some kind of economic goodies that will be given to North Korea. But even those are not working. The Kaesong Industrial Complex is an example, which gave about $100 million a year to North Koreans. And at the drop of the hat, they say, we are closing it down. So, because for them, it's very important, the regime survival is the most important thing. So that is, I just wanted to mention.
This is the background. Then let's come to only this. Okay, this last point. The summits which are upcoming, the Inter-Korean and followed by the Kim and Trump summit. We expect nothing major in that, but we expect that something will come out of that. May not be desirable, but something achievable. In that case, if we achieve something, I mean to say the summits achieve something, so is it going to make any impact on the Sino-Indian relations per se at any level? Would it have any kind of implication in that domain, or would it not have at all? So that's another point which is coming.
The Chinese word, we happily defer it to the Chinese.
May I just add to that? Would you see a no-war pact coming out between North and South Korea, or some words to that effect, as he has mentioned, in the talks between the two? And do you just see some sort of freezing of nuclear devices and material in due course, along with return of the IAEA inspectors? Because we have done a brilliant job by giving us all options. But as he said, at the summit of South and North, there's bound to be some sort of agreements. I do not know what they will be, but a thing like no war pact, which scares both of them.
We'll combine all questions now.
Excellencies, according to the United Nations rules and regulations, any country can possess a limit of missiles and nuclear weapons.
One question.
Okay. Any other question?
Yeah.
Please, sorry.
I'm Vijay Naik, I'm journalist. I just want to ask you about the unpredictability. So we have been talking for the past about 1 hour, unpredictability. Now, even after the trilateral summit also, which takes place as in Beijing or somewhere, will the situation change or will it still remain unpredictable?
Okay, Rakesh, I'll add one question for you. Until late last year, talking to various interlocutors from China, Korea, Japan, I think there was a sort of consensus that North Korea is not going to go up its nuclears. But then this whole objective of denuclearization of Korean Peninsula is being discussed in all seriousness. Do you think that's a feasible option even in the long term?
Well, okay. I think Kim Jong-un knew very well that he had to use the word denuclearization. I mean, that is the bait. Without that bait, it doesn't work. Now, how tempting is it? Will Trump, and Trump also has an ego. And here you have to separate the South Korean and the US motivations. So we're looking at Trump. Trump, incidentally, you might recall that early last year, Trump had also, in an interview to Reuters, he had actually spoken very empathetically about Kim Jong-un, where he said, imagine 27-year-old chap, his father dies, he comes to power, difficult times, I see his difficulties. So in a sense, he looks at himself as a deal maker, and that's how Trump sees himself. So if he thinks that he is getting a deal which shows him up in good light, where he can show that he has achieved something, because he's also been very critical of the fact that his predecessors had these talks with Kim Jong-un, with the North Koreans, with Kim Jong-un's father and so on. Didn't come to anything. And then he is able to show that my personal diplomacy, my strong sanctions, my influence on China to really come down hard, that's what has delivered. Now, what makes him, what Trump considers a successful deal is something that is in his head. I mean, he has to go to sleep at night thinking what he has done is a successful deal, and so that in the morning he can tweet that I have cracked the tough challenge of North Korea. If he does that in his morning tweet, then you've had a successful summit. If he doesn't, then it's not been a successful summit. But so denuclearization I see merely as the bait. I think Kim Jong-un is not going to give up his nuclear weapons. They are a guarantee, they are his lifeline. And that's going to be there. Now the question is, how clever can he be? Now when you come to the South Koreans, there it is different. And you can have different views. But I think at least insofar as President Moon is concerned, I think for him it is critical that tensions keep diminished, that tensions are not allowed to be ratcheted up, because that puts him. See, this is the third summit that is taking place, the third time that you have South Korean and North Korean leaders meeting. And each time it is what is their sunshine policy advocates. When they are in power, they are able to take this forward. And President Moon is known to be a strong proponent of the sunshine policy and dialogue with North and all the rest of it. So he would be more keen to have a summit, he would be more keen to provide a certain leeway, but yet at the same time he can't go as far as he would like, because he has to be on the right side of the Americans. He also has to be right side, he also has to carry the conservatives in his own country with him, because he can't be seen to be so soft on North Korea. So that also constrains him, but his own inclination is to be more forgiving, as it were, to have a longer rope as in order to make for keeping the tensions low. Sorry, there was a question that you would...
Heading to a no war pact between the two.
Well, a no war pact or the equivalent of that, we have been there in the past. So in a sense, the question, I think, the way I would phrase your question incidentally would be to see if you can move forward from that frozen 1953 armistice. Correct. Well, in some fashion, a peace treaty, whatever you want to do. It may not even happen in one stage. It may happen in more than one stage. But at least if people come around to looking at that armistice, which is seen as something which is actually the justification, for the continued US military presence and all the rest of it.
So no shot has been fired except once or twice.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But theoretically that remains in place. It is an armistice. The US maintains it is an armistice and they need to be ready, alert, etc., etc. So can that be unfrozen? And if that is unfrozen, where does that go? That is something which is possible, but it's not going to be a one-shot affair. So that's why I said that if the outcome is a process, and if it is seen as a successful deal insofar as Trump's perception is concerned, then I think it would start something, if not, at least during President Moon's current term, certainly, because he is committed to it. And Trump would have something to say that he has successfully achieved, because don't forget, before that on 12th of May, he would probably have nixed the Iran deal. So if after that, he would be already under criticism from Russia, from China, from the Europeans, all of whom have been supporters of the JCPOA. So after that, he has to show that, you know, the key difference here is, in the case of Iran, both American allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel, want him to take a hard line on Iran. In the case of North Korea, both South Korea and Japan want Trump not to raise tensions. And in fact, China is not an ally, but China also shares the same objective. So the forces are somewhat differently aligned.
The no war pact. All the indications are that at the moment Trump has also alluded to that, South Korea has alluded to that they are going, no war pact is to say we will not do a negative. A peace treaty is to say that we will get into the positive territory. So I would think that technically a peace treaty is far superior to a no war pact. And there are indications that when the two Korea's leaders meet, they will talk of a peace treaty, and they would perhaps agree to, or at least agree to some kind of some draft framework or outline or something which will then be taken to Trump. So, but the challenge is not a treaty. The challenge is a trust deficit and the transactional nature of the US politics. Obama did the Iran deal and Trump is tearing it off. Now what is the use of a treaty or a document where there is no trust? So the big challenge is the trust deficit, and that is unlikely to be bridged in a hurry, because so much of bad blood has flown in over the last 70 years. So I'm not sure whether such a treaty is feasible, but they will be talking about it, and perhaps the game plan would be to let things fizzle out. And unpredictability.
Yeah, even after the summit takes place.
Sir, the only thing predictable in the Korean Peninsula is unpredictability.
Well, I think I should bring discussion to closure. It has been a really fascinating discussion, and I'd like to request all of you to join me in thanking the two speakers. And can I now request you to join us for a cup of tea in the adjoining room?